Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to make a fillet weld. So a fillet is when we've got two pieces that are perpendicular to each other, 90 degrees to each other. And normally you're going to see this in structural welding. So this is different than pipe welding. We're here in Texas. The majority of everything that's welded here has to do with oil and gas, so there's a lot of pipe welding, but there is still also a lot of structural welding. So I'm going to review with you kind of the basics of a fillet. And so to start off, I've got these two pieces. I'm just using somebody else's coupon. We've got the two pieces welded together, and normally if you're setting this up, you're going to tack it here, and if I had the smaller piece, I would center it in the middle, and then we're going to weld one side only. So if somebody already did this practicing, make sure that you don't weld both sides, because we want to be able to break this to check the penetration of the weld. I've also got some garbage here from who knows what. We're just going to try to weld over that since we're just doing this for demonstration. In the last video we talked about arc length, travel angle, work angle, and travel speed. And in this video I want to go over the different positions with you. So if we're welding, there's four ways we could weld. If we had this at 45 degrees and we welded a line straight where my thumb is going, then that would be the 1F position because it's flat. So even though the work piece is at an angle, I want you to think about the top of the weld. The top of the weld is flat, and this is going to be the easiest one to learn in because you don't have to worry about the weld trying to run down, right? Because gravity is always working against us. It's trying to pull that liquid metal down. So in the 1F position, that's going to be the most friendly to learning. And what I see is most people don't want to take the time to get another piece of scrap and tack this in place, and they just get in a hurry, and so you're going to fight yourself and you're losing that learning curve. All right, so this is really the ideal place to start. The next one is going to be horizontal. So if you think about this, as we're welding straight across, gravity wants that liquid metal just to fall down. So it's going to normally be harder to get the penetration into this top piece, or you're going to spend all your energy getting the penetration into the top piece, and it's just going to kind of settle on top. So sometimes when I break these, they'll just fall apart real easily, and we'll have 100% penetration on one piece and basically 0% penetration on the other. So you got to be aware of that. With this being at 90 degrees to flat, that's going to be the 2F position. So horizontal. All right, so the first one is flat, the second one is horizontal. Each position, as it goes up, it's going to get a little more difficult. So now we're going to go into vertical, and you can go vertical up or you can go vertical down. It depends on what you're welding with, what kind of material you're using, and just personal preference. But a lot of times I prefer welding up because I'm kind of having to force the puddle to go up. And whenever I weld vertical down, I have to compensate for the fact that the weld wants to just fall off, right? It's trying to just basically drip off. But you can experiment with different ways once you get through a couple of these positions to see what works best for you. And then the last one is going to be 4F, and that's overhead. So if you think about this now, not only are we trying to penetrate into this piece upside down with the weld wanting to fall down, we've got to deal with the weld wanting to fall down also on this vertical piece. So we'll review that again real quick. We've got 1F, which is flat, 2F, which is horizontal, 3F, which can be vertical up or vertical down, and then we've got overhead. All right, so I'm going to get set up, but I want to talk to you about a couple of things before we do that. All right, so as I'm welding this, you can just pull or you can push, whatever you're comfortable with. So pulling or pushing doesn't matter. And if you can keep your speed correct and you can keep that wire tip right down there in that crevice, you can weld this together and you'll have 100% penetration. But it is kind of harder to do. Everybody wants to MIG weld and make a nice pretty weld, and they think, okay, that's it, I'm a professional welder now, what's next? But it's really not true, and we'll see this when we break these to test them. What I suggest is you try a couple different passes, and for me personally, I like kind of going up and then back down, and then up and then back down, and then up, and then back down. And so from the, if I'm moving this way, you're doing a little ellipse, all right? So you can, I'm gonna exaggerate this, but I want you to see what I'm doing. So I'm going up and back a little, and then forward and down and back a little, and then forward and up and back a little, and then forward, down, back a little. All right, so let's look at that again. Up, down and back, up and back, down and back, up and back, down and back, up and back, down and back. Now, we're welding 1/4-inch plates, so we really don't want this weld to be, to have a distance from top to bottom of more than 3/8. We're looking ideally for a 1/4 inch. So you don't want that weld to be really big like this one is. And we can see right here what happened is that, you know, it penetrated really well here, but you can see it's kind of doing that muffin top. So I can promise you that it didn't penetrate right there. And then some of this is looking okay. You can see some movements in those freeze lines, and so there's probably going to be some penetration issues here. But as far as the angle goes, I'm looking for 45 degrees, all right? So 0, 90, half a 90 is 45, all right? And I'm going to exaggerate that here, but that's the angle I'm looking at. Another thing I'm going to have you do is when you make one, I'll have you make another one at the bottom and then another one at the top. So it'd be 1, 2, 3, and then you go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we'll keep building this up, you know, more and more and more until it's just solid weld. And that's really important because a lot of the things that you're going to weld in industry, it's not just going to be one pass, it's going to be multiple passes, and we're going to want that to pass on X-ray. For now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and show you what this looks like. So let's get started. Make sure you've got all of your safety gear. I've got my jacket on, I've got my gloves, I've got my hood, and I've got my safety glasses. Alright, let's see if that works. Alright, so on my Miller-Matic, I've got this set at about 20 on voltage and 340 on the wire speed. Alright, so I'll run through this one time. You can kind of see I'm doing this. And now we'll do it for real. Cover. So I'm going down, and then up, and then down, and then up, and then down, and then up, down, up. So you can see I'm kind of hanging at the bottom, and I'm hanging at the top. For just a second, so that I can ensure that I've got good penetration. Alright, so there's just a little bitty tack weld. It's a little fat for my taste. But I'm going to go ahead and finish this out, and I'm going to try to do a little bit of a tie-in just to show you what we're looking at. Cover. So on this tie-in, I'm going to come forward about, maybe a 1/4 inch. I'm going to start the bead, and then I'll go back and hover for a second, and then move forward. Cover. Alright, so there's our finished weld, and you can see from where the gas was coming out where that tie-in was. But once we clean that off, it's a little less obvious. So that tie-in is right there. It probably should have come back a little bit more. I would be worried when I broke this that there would be some kind of lack of penetration in there. But if you're starting off, that's okay. So what I'm looking for is a 3-inch long tack weld, but I don't want you're probably not going to get it the first time, and that's okay. But when you don't, I'm going to have you work on stacking these up, and that's what's going to give you the really good practice where you're going to get a feel for this. So let's do, what I want to do now is I want to run a bead, and I'm going to drag the wire right here along the bottom. and that's going to put half of the weld off and then half of the weld on top of the previous weld. So again, I'm going to put the wire, keep my center right on the bottom of this weld, and then half of my new weld will go on here, the previous bead, and half will go off. And then when I get done, I'm going to drag the wire on the top of the second bead, and that will put half there and then half back on this parent metal. So let's see what that looks like. Cover. Now the next thing is I want you to notice that I'm moving a little bit quicker because I'm starting to get some heat into this metal. And that might have been really a little bit too fast. But let's go ahead with the third weld. So I want you to see how that line followed the second one, and I've got half of my second bead onto half of the first bead. And now I'm going to follow the wire right on top of this one where I can kind of double up on it. Alright, so you can see that we're still keeping that 45-degree angle, and now I'm going to do what is technically the fourth bead or the third one on this set of passes to tie in to the top. So what's important for you to understand here is that if we had an inch thick piece of metal on the top and the bottom, there's no way we could weld it in one pass. So we need to make multiple passes up where this filler material is going to equal an inch thick, so that at no point are these two pieces of metal thinner than the original 1 inch of each piece. Hopefully that makes sense. So up here on the top, we're going to have to worry about what's called undercut. And so as I go back, I'm putting material in where it carves the parent metal out from the heat. There we go. And if we look at that, there's no undercut. We've still got 45 degrees going right here, and now we've built 1, 2, 3, 4 passes on this. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make another 4 passes on top of that. Cover. I've got 1 pass. I'm going to go ahead and do the second, and I'm splitting that top, cover. There's my second. I'm going to go for my third. Alright, so there's the third pass. But again, ideally, I want you to make a pass, make 2 passes, and then cool it down. And you really should just be letting this air cool in front of a fan. You could quench it with water because we're never going to use it, but if we were in the field doing something, we don't want to quench it with water because it's going to change the atomic structure of it and potentially weaken the metal. Okay, so let's do the 4th pass. There's our 4th, and then I'm going to go ahead and add a 5th right on there because I'm not penetrating into this top piece. Cover. Let's take a look at that. You know, I'm a little bit concerned about this right here, but overall I'm happy with the freeze lines, I'm happy with the angle, and I'm happy with how these are stacking up. And so we'll look at this. Now you see the tendency is it is a little wider down here, right? Because gravity is fighting us. We're always going to be tending to slope out more in this direction. And we're going to have to keep fighting it to build it up more in this direction. And again, I'm hoping that you can see in those videos, but I'm just doing this kind of, I'm going to exaggerate it right here again for you, but I go up and back because as I go down, I'm gouging out an area right here, and it will leave what's called undercut. And when I go back, I'm just adding that filler metal for what I burned out of this parent metal piece. So down and back, up and back, down and back, up and back, down and back, up and back, down and back. And you'll have to really watch that puddle, because that puddle is going to tell you everything you need to know. That puddle is telling me where to move, when to move, and how fast to move. If you start paying attention to that puddle and making the connection of what's going on between the gun, your settings, and where the puddle needs to go or wants to go, then you can start getting a natural feel for it, and you'll be able to manipulate that puddle wherever you want. So if you do get some undercut, a lot of times, at least to me, it seemed like, oh well, I'm moving too slow, and so it's gouging it out. But really, you probably need to move slower and go back and give the wire enough time to deposit metal from where the heat gouged it out the first time. That's always been my experience. I hope this helps you out, guys, and this is really what I want to see. I want to be, at least 1.25 inches tall by 1.25 inches, filled out, and I want it as close to 45 degrees as you can get. And I also want to make sure that on every set of passes, I want to see what's going on, so that if you're making some mistakes, we can address that before you get all the way to the end, and then you don't have to weld this whole thing over again. All right, hope this helps. Appreciate you. If you have any questions, watch the video again. Thanks.